Are you ready to take your portraits in Midjourney to the next level? I'm going to show you how you can take your portraits and make them look like this and more. We're going to be playing with key lights to build some really dramatic lighting effects. Before we dive into Midjourney, let's first discuss about the basics of lighting in photography, because that's what we're going to be using. Lighting is essential for creating depth, contrast, mood in your artwork. You can use different types of lighting, such as natural light and even studio lighting. So let's dive right in. To make the portrait dramatic, we are going to be using lighting. So I'm going to be putting in the first prompt. That's going to be key light. And the prompt that I'm going to use is going to be a very simple generic prompt. The different kinds of lights that we will be working with are going to be natural light, studio light, artificial light as mentioned, and also I have one last thing that I'm also going to be showing you, so do stick around for the end. We do have one image which I do like here. Now I'm not going to be working on character consistencies or consistent building of a specific character today. For that, do stick around and don't forget to subscribe, because I'm going to be also talking about how to create consistent characters. But for today, I'm just focusing on lighting. So definitely it has a beautiful key light. So I'm going to stick with this image. The only parameter that I used was seed. Adding light just adds more depth and dimension to the overall portrait. And it helps elevate your own imagery if you're creating portraits on Midjourney. As we can see, image number 1 has a really sharp hard light, but it also has a backlight, which we didn't ask for. Sometimes it can be a hit and a miss if you're not adding other control parameters. But as you can see, here we do have hard light, but we also have a slither of the hair light, but we don't need that light. We just needed the key light, which is the hard light. The most important thing to realize is that the key light is not just the only light, but then we can also break it down into other kinds of lights. I'm also going to show you what you can do if you wanted to create a portrait that would want natural light, because natural lights could also have different kinds of circumstances, like golden hour. The more parameters we have, the more control we can have over our prompts. But since I'm not putting any parameters, we're just going to be going with the lights. As you can see, we have a really hard light on her face, as mentioned before. Taking the same prompt, changing the key light and calling it catch light, and then the prompt stays the same. Notice I have removed the parameter because I didn't want to add seed into this specific prompt. I just want to focus on the light, so I just removed the seed parameter. And for the rest of the video, the remainder of the prompt is going to stay the same, so to give us the idea of a more dramatic portrait with different kinds of lighting. In the fourth image, as we can see clearly, we do have a beautiful soft rim light, but we also have a very soft glow of catch light on her eyes. I think it's important that we should try and work with the 3-point light, because it can give us a very interesting effect. Especially if you are working in a studio, it would mean that you have a key light, a fill light, and a backlight. Now, as we can see, we do have a soft catch light on her eyes, but we have a very prominent rim light from the back. That's exactly what we were going for, the catch light. Some of the elements in the prompt, we were just focusing on one kind of thing, which was the catch light in this instant. Now, as I said, we're going to be also talking about the 3-point lighting. Why is it very important to talk about it? Because the key light is the brightest light when we are talking about a light source for a portrait. It usually stands at 45 degrees, and the fill light, as the name suggests, is a fill. Either it's a reflected light or it's a light that is lighter or softer than the key light. And the backlight, as the name suggests, is a light that comes from the back. Now, with that said, let's see how that would work in effect with the same exact prompt using the word 3-point light. And we should see some use of effect of exactly what I just mentioned now. A key light, a fill light, and a backlight. Now, of the first roll, I honestly do not like the image compositions, because firstly it's coming up as black and white. But again, as I have mentioned, if we are only putting one specific descriptor, it can be challenging to get control over the kind of image we want. There is a certain sense of dramatic effect. So for that reason, I'm going to re-roll this. Hope that we can get the kind of light that we are looking for. I would say that of the 4 images that we can see on the screen, the second image definitely has a more stronger suit to just a 3-point light, because we can prominently see a backlight, we can see a soft key light, and there is a fill, but it's more like a reflected light. I'm going to go with this image, even though this one is there, but this one is more of an ambient light. I'm going to be also talking about ambient light today, but more than this image, I think this one would be a nice example of a 3-point light. Now, definitely the second image, when upscaled, we can see more noticeably that it is actually a very beautiful 3-point light with its own sense of a mood. That is how we can get a more dramatic and effective portrait. It also has catch light. It's got a nice, beautiful fill light and a very eloquent backlight. So this is what a 3-point light could look like with no other parameters. I think it is a closer depiction to what a real photographic 3-point light would look like in a studio. Now let's head to what I would say is the next part of it, because we've only spoken about the first two parts, which is the key light and the fill light. But there is also another important part, which is the backlight. It can create some really powerful message. If you don't have a fill light or the key light, just having a backlight can have its own sense of drama, power, just because of the way it can create a silhouette. We can already see how the backlight, without any kind of added information about front light, means the key light or the fill light, has its own kind of effect. This one has a little bit of a bleed in, as we say, feathering in of light coming in. But here we can see a beautiful silhouette where we get an impression of who the person is, but we don't get anything else except for that, almost like a silhouette. This is a really nice example. But again, since I said backlight and I haven't given any other parameters, it's also giving me a more side angled image. So far we were having front faced image. Again, parameters and the details and the more nuances of parameters will be spoken in another video. If you want more controllability, that is where we are going to go. But today we are just focusing on lights to create more depth, mood, and a certain sense of drama, almost emulating what photographs and photographers can do in the real world. We can clearly see her, but we can also not see her. So it is a perfect example of how the backlight could work if you were to only use that as a prompt with your additional prompts. And it is also one thing to note that whenever you're creating your prompts for light, to put the lights in the front, then have your prompt, it gives more emphasis for your specific portraits. Now that said, I'm going to be now discussing about two more kinds of light. Now I'm just going to go for the intensity. So one is going to be hard light and soft light. I'm just going to start with hard light. And like in real world, hard light is nothing but the super contrasted shadows on face or anything. And soft light would be the opposite. It's soft diffused shadows. And as we can see, studio key light would do to a hard light. We can see how beautifully the image is hard light because of the fact that we can see the key light bouncing off her forehead. And then we can also see her collarbones popping up because of an effect of the hard light. I think this is a really good example of what we can expect if you wanted to just put the word hard light with a prompt. Now, the next one I'm going to do is the opposite of that, which is going to be the soft light, where the hard light is more dramatic fitness or an athletic image. The soft light gives out a more ethereal look to it. Image number 3 is a good example of that. In this case, I think all of the images have a very good example for that specifically, because you don't actually see the transition from the highlights to the shadows, as opposed to in the hard light, where you can actually see the transition from the hard highlights and the shadows. That is why this is called a soft light. And it is a good example of something to keep in mind when you are working with the Midjourney, because that can be helpful for the kind of portraits that you want to create. One thing to note though about the key light is that it does not always have to face the direction of the subject. And that is going to be another video that I'm going to have, where I'm going to be diving more deeper into the more complex ways of using multiple lights to create even further cinematic scenes, not just in portraits, in Midjourney. So whatever we would have seen in cinematography or in photography, if we can merge multiple things together, we can see that. And I'm going to have a video for that really soon. Now, as we can see this image, there is really soft and subtle transition from the shadows to the highlights. And it also has a much more softer tone in general. Two more important lighting methods would be to add light or to remove light. Low key and high key light. Low key light would make everything darker and high key light would make everything brighter. Now in the photography world, that would mean that you're adding in more light using bounces or reflective light, or you're subtracting light. Here we're going to do the same exact thing by using the words low key light. As we can see, low key lights are supposed to be more into the shadows. Even the key light, it's supposed to give a sense of mystery, but it also has a really strong mood. And low key light, if used properly, can really have a powerful impact. The first image surely has low key lighting. One thing to note though is that so far all the lights that we have been considering and talking about are lights that would be used in a studio. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm going to also have one last trick which could really spice up the portraits to a whole new level. Now there you have it. Low key light has its own kinds of different lights as we have discussed so far, the key lights and the fill lights and the backlights, but just the overall image is much more darker than you would expect. And that is exactly the kind of vibe that low key light would help achieve if you're trying to get something more moody and dark. And now consequently, we're going to go for high key light. At the exact opposite spectrum of low key light would be high key light. As mentioned earlier, it would be the addition of light or more light added. Now directly just looking at these images with comparing to the previous images from the low key light, we can already see ethereal, softer, and they completely resonate a different emotion. Now you can also mix and match, and that's a whole different monster on its own. Now in comparison to the low key light, the high key light has a really different vibe, more soft. This is exactly how you would have the high key light if you were doing a real photograph. So that does have its own space into consideration when you're thinking of prompting with the high key light. This is how the high key light would look. It still has all the principles that we have spoken about, the different kinds of lights, whether it is a rim light or a backlight, fill light, or a key light, but it's just generally more brighter than a low key light. Now, so far we've been discussing lights that could be in an artificial situation like a studio, but now I'm going to be taking you to the outdoors, on location. What would you do if you're on location in your Midjourney scene and you want a kind of light that would help you? And I'm going to add ambient light. So what ambient light would mean in a sense would be the light that is coming around the scene based on anything else that you would have in the scene. These are not controlled lights. The ambient light is the light that's naturally available around you, and that's the light that you're using and you're making use of for your portraits. He is perched up next to a window, and in the background you can see the shadow, you can see the light in the background there, and you can actually almost feel like the light's coming in through there. So that's what an ambient light could do. I think this one is a good example of an ambient light, which is an available use light. If you're creating a character who just needs not studio lights or just like on location lights, window light is another good light, reflective light is another good light. As I mentioned earlier, for the first time through our prompts, we are in a position where it looks like this could be an on-location image. So if you were to create an environmental portrait in Midjourney, this could be a nice approach to have if you just used ambient light. The last kind of light that we can use would be the natural light. Multiple variations of lights, but I'm going to just start with natural light. When you are thinking of natural light in photography, it would be light from the window, reflected light, bounce light, but it's the use of light that's available around us. So in these examples are perfect for that kind of an idea. It is very close to ambient light, but ambient light would usually have to do something with the available environment. Natural light is the use of available light, and ambient light is just having an ambience or an environment around you. So both are similar but also different in its own way. We can already see that with so many different variations in just light, using the same exact prompt and no other parameters, we are getting so many varieties of different emotions, drama, and mood. Some are more serious than others, and some are more ethereal than others. A clear example of the beautiful light that what we could assume to be a light that's coming from a window is what a natural light would give us. Now this is where the natural light could be. If you've watched till so long, then I really thank you for that. So now I'm going to add golden hour light. the reason why the golden hour light is so popular because it has that golden tinge. So I think the golden hour light has its own kind of category in the set of natural lights. Obviously, what I have been showing is a gross oversimplification of lights. There are a myriad of different lights that we can have and we can use even through Midjourney. But these are just some of the lights that we can work with. Now, as we can see in the golden hour, each of these light examples are a really good example of what golden hour lights could look like. This is exactly what golden hour entails. It means the first burst of the dusk or the dawn light, which is just nice, crispy golden, which is why the name has itself. So if you wanted to use this, this is where you would see the light come into place. Again, the choice that you would want to make is upon you when you're creating your own prompts, but just adding the word golden hour light could give you some really nice crispy golden light, which is just beautiful, especially if you don't have the opportunity to get golden hour for whatever reason. You can always emulate and create that in your portraits or in your body of work that you're working with in Midjourney. Now we can clearly see that the golden hour, as mentioned, has this really nice kind of a quality to it. It is a very unique quality that many in-studio photographers and cinematographers try to emulate. So you having this ability and understanding of using golden hour in Midjourney gives you a leg up when you're trying to create your own prompts and trying to understand the rationale behind using that lighting for your own prompts whenever and wherever you want to use it for whatever different reasons. So in this instance, we're using it for this portrait, and it really gives a beautiful glow there. The light coming in from the back here, a clear example that we don't always need the key light in the front, as I had stated earlier. You can also have the key light coming from the back. Again, these are gross oversimplifications of the kinds of light that could be used in Midjourney, as Midjourney can understand a range of different lighting methods and a range of different modifiers. Like I said, I have one last thing to show you, and that is use of color, gel. So if I just said, using the very first example, 3-point light, and then if I use the word gel lighting, and then if I used orange and teal. Why orange and teal? Because orange and teal is a color that has been most notably used by Hollywood production houses, and it has been noted to be most cinematic. So I'm going to be putting that, and since 3-point light is our studio or artificial light that we've been using for so long in today's video, that's an example that I want to show you. And then I'm going to use the same example for natural light. So if you wanted to add some more spice to your image, you can add your own kind of lighting depending on the color theory. So orange and teal really looks good, and it can completely change the scene. And I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to take it for natural light, gel lighting. So that can actually just add a whole different range of creativity. Again, this is the first instance of adding more control. So far, we've just focused on lighting and different kinds of lights. If you wanted to give a little bit more to your images, we can see whether be it natural light or be it in studio lighting, you can add a gel light simulation, and that could give you the portrait to look like completely different and more dramatic. It could almost remove the portrait from where it was. So with these, you can almost see it's having its own different statement piece. So there you have it. You just learned how to create some stunning portraits using different kinds of lighting for artificial lights, studio lights, on location light, and natural light. And we also had a quick tip bonus for adding a little bit control to the portraits. And it was really basic so that you can all do it and you can all have fun with it. Hope you found this tutorial helpful in enhancing your photography skills using Midjourney and helping you pre-visualize your next photo shoot or creating new characters on Midjourney using these wonderful lighting techniques. Simple lighting techniques that photographers and cinematographers have been using when applied on Midjourney portraits or any other artwork can give you a completely different range of images, and it also creates different depth and contrast and mood. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for more content on AI generative art You can find my other videos on the screen, and I'll see you in the next video.